All righty, welcome to another Behind the Scenes Prospects Corner by Just Baseball Media. As always, I'm your host, Jared Perkins, but I have an incredible guest with me today, Kevin O'Brien from the Royals Reporter and Pitcher List. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Michael Garcia just hit a leadoff home run. So that's and after writing an article about why the Royals need to have him more at the leadoff spot, this is pretty nice to see. Of course, they lost the lead, but hey, still a lot of baseball to go. But so two in a row against the Dodgers. So I'm feeling pretty good about being a Royals fan, which hasn't been easy this year.
Yeah, have to admit that is true. But that is what the theme is going to be on this podcast. We have an incredible interview that we'll get to later with Samad Taylor, one of the prospects of the Kansas City Royals, who was recently called up. But what we want to do with these pods is really kick off with a discussion of the farm system of the guys that we've interviewed. So we wanted to go into the Royals farm system. There's a lot of things that we can talk about here. But Kev, I want to kick off the first part of the discussion talking about the recent lack of top 100 prospects, right? We saw MLB Pipeline bump Gavin Cross out. I think Baseball America also did out of their top 100. What's the state of the Royals farm currently?
I think it's a bit of in a crossroads. To be honest, I liked Cross, but I didn't love Cross as a prospect, and I kind of felt him being a top 100 guy was going to be on shaky ground this year. I think a lot of that was due to him having a really good campaign in Low A Columbia after he signed. I think if he didn't have that kind of campaign, he probably wouldn't have been a top 100 guy. So I'm not surprised with his slow start in Quad Cities that he's not. And kind of after that, it was really polarizing who was kind of the top 2, 3 in the system. I know Michael Garcia had gotten some hype, but some people were questioning the power. I know some people liked Ben Caderna, but they were questioning the strikeout ability. Some liked Frank Mazzucato, but they questioned the walks. So it was kind of one of the things. There was always like a lot of flaws depending on who you really liked. So I'm not kind of surprised that they're kind of in this crossroads. I think the system will get better after the draft. I think the system will get better after the trade deadline. So I'm not surprised that they're kind of in the lower end, but I think they're stocking. I think what we are seeing is that the system is doing a good job of developing late round picks. And I think that's going to really start to come to fruition in the second half. So I'm really looking forward to that. But, in terms of, is this what it was back in 2022? Obviously not. This is not the Bobby Witt, MJ, Nick Prado classes that we're seeing. And so I think, I think a lot of people understand that too. I mean, any prospect service that you see is saying, if you want to count young talent, it's okay. But when it comes to actual prospects, it's a little thin right now.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit more into Gavin Cross because you mentioned that. I think the one thing that was concerning a lot of people was he's striking out over 30% of the time. He's actually recently brought that down to 29.9. He's right on the edge.
Here we go.
But he's made some improvements in June, which have kind of really impressed me. I think he was somewhere around like the 23% strikeout march for the month. So I'm wondering if a lot of that's due to adjustments. He still hit 10 home runs. He stole 16 stolen bases. To me, it's like I have a hard time just giving up on him right away, right? I think Preston Farr who covers Royals minor leaguers for Royals Review touched on how he reminds him a lot of Tyler O'Neill, and I can see that comp a lot. Left-handed style, he's got some of the same swing and miss issues, but Tyler O'Neill came up and hit like 30 plus home runs for the Cardinals at some point. I think Cross could kind of play that same role. What are you seeing kind of in Gavin Cross's game that gives you some hope, but also gives you some concern?
I haven't thought about that Tyler O'Neill reference, but that makes a lot of sense. And who knows what Tyler O'Neill could be like if he wasn't injured, right? If you could have a healthy Tyler O'Neill, I think a lot of Royals fans would take that. I mean, I think what kind of really deflates people about Tyler O'Neill is that he just can't stay healthy. I think, the Ks are going to be a reality. I mean, but I do think the walks are going to be still there. I think the power's there. I think the speed is there. I do think he's more of a corner outfielder, but I think he can be a very good corner outfielder. There's a lot of Drew Waters, but with a little bit more power kind of in his game, it feels like. Maybe not as like great defensively as Waters, but I mean, the stolen bases is kind of surprising. The home runs have always been there. I'm kind of in the same boat. Is he a top 100 guy? No, but I wasn't thinking he was a top 100 guy either. Like when it came to my top 50 prospects list, I had Garcia over him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of like, hey, like I kind of get it, but I still think there's going to be some hope. I think he kind of shouldered a lot of those expectations early on in the year, and when it didn't go his way, I think he kind of struggled through that. But I think he's working through that now that the hype has kind of gone down a little bit. So I could see him still having a good, solid year in high A, and I could see him if he gets a call up to Double A, I could see him having a solid debut and hopefully parlaying that into a good 2024.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we just kind of want to see the momentum continue to kind of go in the right direction, kind of as it has been so far. The other thing I want to touch on too, thinking of Cross and guys like Caden Wallace who came out of the last draft. Caden Wallace has been kind of an absolute stud, kind of all around. I don't think he's got anything that's super flashy that you're like, oh, this is going to be an absolute elite superstar, but he just kind of does everything right. He plays the hot corner well, has a really good arm. Has been one of the better hitting prospects, at least in the lower levels. So do you have any thoughts on Caden Wallace?
Yeah, I've really been impressed with him. He was one I was kind of on the fence. I'm kind of surprised he didn't get more hype for the futures gain consideration. I mean, you look at his numbers; they're actually pretty good. I mean, you look at like 269 batting average, okay, a little low, but 132 WRC plus, 8 home runs, 12 stolen bases. You have a 0.49 walk to K ratio. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't give him the nod there. Maybe they just felt they had too many position players and they'd rather give it to a pitcher. Mm-hmm. But, I think he's been one of the better prospects. I think he's put himself into consideration that he's a bona fide top 5 Royals prospect in their system, maybe definitely a top 3, I think, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the question, right? Is there's so much depth around that area with, the infield being an area of strength right now for the Royals. Like, so what's going to be Wallace's future? Is somebody else going to get dealt to make room for that? So I think but I think that's a next year decision. I don't think that's a August decision or July decision by any means. But I've been really impressed with him because I think I was kind of on the fence a little bit, and just because I know he had some of that SEC pedigree, and I was like, okay, is he worthy of that SEC pedigree, or is he another Brady McConnell that maybe doesn't live quite up to that? And he's so far really proved that he can.
Yeah, I've been quite impressed with Caden Wallace. I will say, admittedly, I was very high on Gavin Cross coming out of the draft for various reasons. I mean, the one big reason was that he just cut down on his strikeouts so much during his senior year or junior year, sorry. And the swing and miss seemed to be gone or not gone, but at least improved. And it just kind of it's taken a step back. And then when you saw him in low A too, I thought, oh, well, there's some improvements. But yeah, Caden Wallace was a guy that I was really excited that they got. Like him and Max Wagner were the 2 guys that I really wanted the Royals to get that pick. I think Max Wagner's been struggling a little bit with the Orioles, but he's still flashing a ton of power and speed at the hot corner, which is cool to see. Sticking with the lower minors before we kind of go into some of like the recent call-ups, the one thing I have noticed is it seems like there's a noticeable lack of bats in the lower minors, right? Outside of Caden Wallace and even Gavin Cross, who's been doing pretty well, at least at the performance level. You look at low A Columbia and it's not pretty. Like Carter Jensen and guys like that seem to be continuing to struggle. It seems like as like Peyton Wilson and John Rave and all these guys have moved to Double A and Triple A, like Tucker Bradley and others, that the Royals haven't really seen the bats continue to develop the same way as those guys have. What are some of the kind of trends and themes you're seeing around the lower minors right now, hitting wise?
We've seen that. I mean, the last 2 years, we know that the Royals after the pandemic had moved their low A affiliate from Lexington to Columbia, and we've really seen the offense has really struggled. A lot of it is because we have a lot of the low A squad has tended to be a lot of our international players matriculating from the DSL and the ACL to Columbia, and you can see there's upside there. You can see that there's some talent, and some raw tools there, whether it's Daniel Vasquez or Lisandro Rodriguez or Gene Ramirez or even Eric Pena. But there's also just some huge flaws, and it just seems like there's a lot of things that help that are have held those guys back. I was really kind of hopeful. I know that Aria Adot, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he came from the Phillies
Mhm.
organization, and he had some really good credentials and working with kind of Latin American hitters and with analytics, and there's been some progress with some guys, but it seems like a lot of that has kind of plateaued. In June after kind of
Yeah.
strong Mays. I know Daniel Vasquez was a guy who had a really good May and then kind of really just kind of plateaued in June. And you can kind of see the same thing from Lisandro Rodriguez, and Eric Pena's shown some power and some walks, but he's like striking out near 50% of the time, which is just insane. So I think that's just a big thing. And I know, like, I remember hearing on the Royals Rundown podcast talking about hitting environments. I know Columbia and the Sally can always kind of be a hit and miss hitting environment for hitters. I remember that when I was covering Giants prospects in
Mhm.
Augusta. But at the same time, it's also, there's also a lot of strikeout issues that are kind of concerning. So I think that's kind of the big issue we're seeing with the low A prospects in the Royal system, a lot of strikeout issues. I don't know if it's just with the development under Saylor. They're just working on being patient, and this is some of the growing pains, and maybe we'll see differences in the second half. I know Columbia was a lot better in the second half last year. So if that trend continues, maybe we'll see some of those progress with those prospects on that hitting end.
Yeah, I think you're your point where if they're trying to be more patient, I mean, Pena's striking out. I was looking it up 53% of the time, but he's walking 16% of the time. That doesn't leave a lot of room for hits.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. Three true outcomes right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the definition of the word right there. Look at
Yeah.
it, Pena.
He's got 7 home runs and 8 stolen bases, but still is hitting 147 on the season. It's been rough to kind of watch him a little bit. Just kind of moving into the other thing I want to talk about is the Royals have had a lot of recent call ups as well. Like Alec Marsh just made his major league debut. Samad Taylor has recently been called up. Even Darian Blanco has called up after JBJ was designated for assignment. So out of some of those recent call-ups like Marsh, is there a guy that's standing out to you that you're really kind of excited to look forward to watching long-term as the second half of the season approaches?
I think Marsh is a big one, most because I think the pitching need is there. I like Blanco just as a personal. I mean, I own his spring training jersey from
Yeah.
2022. So, like, I think Blanco is going to be more of like a one tool kind of guy. We obviously see the speed on the base paths, I think he's going to offer off the bench. And I think Taylor's kind of proven he can be maybe a platoon guy that can go against left-handed starting pitchers. But I think Marsh, it's like I think he showed a lot of potential in his start against the Dodgers. Obviously, he made some mistakes. Mookie Betts will make you pay for that. But there was a lot more. It was a lot more promising than I would have expected, and so I'm really kind of excited for like this crop of pitchers, kind of in the upper levels, especially AAA, to make their way. Jonathan Ballen's a guy that I'm really excited about. Making his way up to the Kansas City. Obviously Anthony Veneziano and Cole Reagan's the most recent acquisition. So I think the pitching is in a dire need. So
Yeah.
I think, I definitely am curious to see if there's one guy that's going to kind of just come in and just really make kind of like stake his place in the rotation for 2024, because I think a lot of them are going to get auditions to do so.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Marsh is a guy that I've always been interested in watching, only because it seems like every year it's talked about that he has the best stuff in the minor league system for the Royals, right? He's got a four pitch mix that is basically all plus pitches, outside maybe the changeup. And he's just got the command is the only thing that's been holding him back. And you're like, if that guy can just get even average command, just get that thing up to a 50 grade, like he could be a number 3 starter in the major leagues.
Yeah, and I think you see it, and it's and again, it's just limiting those mistakes. I know he's done a
Mhm.
little bit better job of that in 2023 compared to 2022, but we've seen that his mistakes get hit hard, and
Yeah.
that's the problem is his mistakes, they go for home runs, they're not going for
Yeah.
singles, and what can he do in the zone to kind of minimize those? And sometimes it takes time, and I think. We've seen some pitchers in the Royals. I know Daniel Lynch was a guy like that took some time. His mistakes were getting blasted, and it took him a year, to figure that out. And so I'm kind of hoping we kind of see that progress as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just kind of touch on 2 more subjects before we get into some under the radar prospects here. The first is kind of the old narrative that we keep hearing is that the Royals can't develop pitching, right? It's even with a new hiring of Ryan Sweeney and Zach Bove, it's still the constant narrative that the Royals can't develop pitching. And it seems like we're less focusing on what's happening now versus like, oh, Royals haven't developed pitching in the past, so they still can't do it. And that seems like every article that comes out references that. But there's been significant development in the arms, especially at the lower levels. When you look at Frank Mazzucato, even Ben Kudrina, David Sandlin, Mason Barnett, Luinder Avila, all these guys have really taken some steps. Even the relievers like Jonah Dipoto, John McMillan, Will Klein at the higher levels. So talk a little bit about, on a positive note, the Royals pitching development and the steps that they've really taken in just year one.
To start off, developing pitching is hard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams that are successful in Major League Baseball that don't develop pitching. St. Louis Cardinals don't develop pitching. The New York Mets don't develop pitching. You could look at, the Padres really don't develop pitching. All their pitchers are free agents and trades and everything like that. So
the Cardinals just trade Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen to the Marlins.
Exactly. So it's like, it's just like, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And that's not an excuse, but it's just like, it's like not every organization can be the Rays and the Guardians just like that. It takes time and it takes luck. But I think that what I like is I feel like there's been a strong focus and priority to really focus on developing the pitching. And I think we're seeing that. And I think we're seeing that, in the lower levels and low A and high A. We're seeing better command from some of the pitchers. It's not perfect, but there's also a lot of raw pitchers there. I mean, you look at Columbia, there's a lot of international and high school prospects pitching there. I mean, those guys came from cold weather states. I mean, those guys are going to take some time to develop. So again, like the Rockies example, it takes time to develop. And then, I think when you're looking at, I think now we're seeing a kind of a crop of AAA pitchers who obviously have flaws, and they're not perfect, but there's seeds of some potential there.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, I think you can say, look, we got some guys that can really fill in a bullpen. Like if Ballin can't make in the rotation, this guy can fill in a bullpen. If Christian Chamberlain, Jonah Dipoto, those guys have intrigue. I still remember that interview with Kyle Boddy and Rouse Farm Report. And I remember Boddy was kind of talking about Chamberlain was one of the toughest pitchers we faced, back then, so there's some potential there. And so I think the starting pitching will come in time. I think once they start developing and once, they get more people within their system, I think the big question is whether or not they'll have the time to do so. But I think we're seeing it's a lot better place. Obviously, like they've been put on blast the last couple of years, and sometimes that takes time to get out of that shadow. Once you get kind of exposed for that, it takes time. I mean, let's face it, the Orioles had one of the worst farm systems during the Dan Duquette era. I mean, let's not think that the Orioles are being hailed as geniuses of player development now, but that wasn't the case during the Dan Duquette era, and so. Those things can't change. And I'm kind of hoping that the Royals are kind of making that change just like we kind of saw the Orioles did, just a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think that's kind of a perfect discussion to have because it's easy to say and point at the flaws that were happening in the past and say they're continuing. But when there's significant improvements happening kind of right in front of your eyes, it's hard to be like, oh, so the same things are still happening. Royals can't develop pitching. But I don't think that's the case. But thinking about the strengths that the Royals have had on the pitching side lately and some of the weaknesses, at least at the lower levels in hitting, what are some of your expectations for the upcoming 2023 MLB draft? Where do you want to see the Royals kind of go in terms of picks and things like that?
One of the things I feel like the Royals don't get enough credit for is their really good job of getting value in the late rounds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at a guy like a Javier Vaz, a 14th round pick, and Fangraphs, though we all know like a lot of Royals fans, as we saw on Twitter today, they have their disagreements with what Fangraphs was the rankings. But the fact is like they're drafting guys in the late rounds that are getting hype, or at least, and so with Javier Vaz, a 14th round pick going, being their fourth best prospect, Austin Charles, being considered their 10th best prospect. So I feel good about the value. I feel good about the Royals, especially on position players, being able to find guys in the later rounds, especially on the position player end, to have value. I know River Town was a guy who was kind of
Mm-hmm.
outproducing his value until he's kind of got hurt. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'd like to see some polished. There's a lot of polished college bats, but I'd like to see continued upgrades on pitching. Just because if the Royals really feel like, hey, this is a strength of our development system, then let's see that, and let's see them invest in the pitching, and let's see them get guys that they feel like, hey, these guys have the skills that we know. And I'd like to see some kind of common denominators. I have all kinds of problems with the Rockies development system, but one thing I do respect is I know, like, when they look for pitching, they'd say, hey, we look for guys from like cold weather colleges or states for high schools or preps. And we kind of feel that, hey, like, they're going to fit our system because of where our minor league teams are, and we're going to and we see things that traditional teams might say, we're going to ignore that because, they're a pitcher from Colorado or they're a pitcher from Kansas or something like that. So, so I'd like to see some common denominators with that. And I think we kind of seen that, with that 2021 draft where they drafted Mazzucato, Cadorna, and Panzini, all cold weather states. But I'd like to see some more drafting and pitching, because at the end of the day, the Royals are not going to get a free agent ace. They're Max Scherzer is not coming to Kansas City. Jacob deGrom is not coming to Kansas City. You need to be able to be like Tampa to develop that Tyler Glasnow, or like Cleveland to develop that Shane Bieber. And I'd like for them to find somebody like that.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the times when the Royals were good, they traded for their aces too. It was Johnny Cueto, it was James Shields, it was guys like that were kind of brought in to really solidify that rotation. So kind of as we kind of segue into the last part here, who's one under the radar prospect that you think other people should be paying attention to that really is not on the top prospects list all over the place, getting all the attention? Is there one guy that you're like, oh, everybody needs to be thinking about this name a little bit more?
The one guy that I continue to get more and more impressed with, and I think he's getting more attention, is just Austin Charles. Just 20th round pick, a lot of high upside when he was selected, and it's and I'm not sure what's his ultimate outlook, but it's kind of looking at like, really, this guy lasted until the 20th round. I think that's going to be the bigger story. It's nice for the Royals to kind of have that prospect that just seems uber athletic, uber upside, uber ceiling, and then them kind of trying to develop that. And sometimes, we've seen a lot of those guys. Like, I'm not saying Austin Charles is Ellie De La Cruz, but Ellie De La Cruz was an underrated international prospect. And he really developed and grew. And I'm not saying that Austin Charles is going to be like that, but it'd be nice to see that kind of story. And I feel like with his upside, that can happen. So he's kind of, I'd say, definitely the big one from a hitting end that I really like. And then I like the other guy that I'm really kind of excited about and continuing to get excited about is Luinder Avila. Just big, strong pitcher. I'm kind of getting really excited about the crop of international pitchers that we're seeing. The Royals, it's had some struggles with the international signings, but they've had some success with pitchers, whether it's your Donald Ventura or Carlos Hernandez. It's like, can Luinder Avila kind of be what we thought Carlos Hernandez would be from a starter's end? And I think he has the size and pedigree to do it. And he's kind of a guy that's really rose fast in the Royals prospect rankings. I think if you looked at any like 2021 or 2022 list, he wasn't on there. And now all of a sudden he's like, oh boy, why didn't we have this guy on there before? So those are kind of two names that I think are not getting a lot of love in the top 30s from like a Baseball America or MLB pipeline that I think are going to be rising fast.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think the only guys I would mention that are really sticking out to me is the relievers that I talked about before, like Jonah DePoto, Will Klein, Christian Chamberlain, who you mentioned, and John McMillan. I feel like those guys are never going to get in like the top 30 ranks just because they're relievers. But you think about the days of Greg Holland, Kelvin Herrera, Wade Davis having like a solidified bullpen. If they can just develop some of these high-powered arms into these 7th, 8th, 9th guys, the starting pitching, you rely on a little bit less, right? You just need 5 innings, 4 innings out of those guys before you have to start going to the pen. So I'm excited to see those high-powered arms. Of course, a lot of them need to lower their walk rate. Guys like Anthony Veneziano, who's starting, I still think he winds up being some kind of reliever, so he can really uptick those K per 9, which has kind of dwindled a little bit this year as he's gone up levels and has continued to start. But I think that's where my focus is kind of on, is those relievers.
And I think that's a great point. I mean, you look at a team like the Astros. The Astros is where they succeed is depth.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like a guy like we have a guy like Javier and Aquidi, and the guy like we can have this 6-man rotation or like long relievers that can really like give us the depth that we need. That's where the modern game is going. And I think the Royals see that. I think the Royals, and I think that's how Q has been handling his pitching staff. Is like, look, like we're not going to have traditional 1 through 5s at times, and maybe we go with openers and go with bulk guys. And so I think if you have guys that can have those quality, and you have multiple pitchers that can be a fifth rotation spot or fifth and sixth rotation spot.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the future of the game, and I think the Royals are at least have potential to really be very good in that end.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to end on too. I mean, Kevin, I can't thank you enough for joining. This has been just an awesome in-depth discussion on the Royals minor league system. Always love talking with you. But before we kind of head over to that interview with Samad Taylor, just let everybody know where they can find you, all your work on Twitter, on blogs, things like that.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter if it continues to work. Had some success today, but at Royal Report Kev, so capital R, and capital K, Royal Report Kev at Twitter. You can find me at my website at royalsreporter.com, and then you can find my work in fantasy baseball for pitcherlist.com as I contribute to the weekly batters box column as well as to the Going Deep section.
That's amazing. Everybody make sure to check out all of Kev's work. But without further ado, we want to get you that interview with Samad Taylor. Another incredible guest, Samad Taylor of the Kansas City Royals. Samad, how are you doing today?
Pretty good yourself. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining. So the first question I kind of always hop into, just because fans don't necessarily know who you are. So just for the fans out there, just give a little bit of background on yourself, kind of how you got to where you are.
Samad Taylor from Corona, California. Was drafted in 2016 by the Cleveland Indians. I was traded in 2017 to the Toronto Blue Jays. Went through every level with the Blue Jays, from Bluefield, West Virginia, rookie ball, to Vancouver, to Lansing, to Dunedin for high A, Double A New Hampshire, Triple A Buffalo. And I'm still here fighting and got traded August 2nd or August 1st, one of the two. August 2nd or August 1st to Kansas City Royals. And now I'm here with the Kansas City Royals, and I've had the opportunity to be put on the 40-man roster and compete for a spot.
Yeah, that's awesome. You just mentioned that being added to the 40-man roster. Kind of take us into like what that moment was like and that feeling when you finally got that call and they're like, "Hey, we're adding you to the 40-man."
It was a relief off my back, for sure.
Yeah.
It was a moment that I've been waiting for, and when it happened, at the time I was in the fall league and I was just coming off injury, so I knew it was up in the air. Didn't know what was gonna happen. They called, "Hey, we're protecting you," and it was like an immediate relief.
Yeah.
And they put me on, and I have no complaints. And called my family, called my girlfriend, let everybody know, told my agent, and now we're here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned another experience there too, the Arizona Fall League. Just for the viewers, that's one of where the top prospects go to play and kind of compete. Talk about the level of competition there, and just having that opportunity to be around those guys like every single day.
It was a blessing. Just being around guys that you know are at some point will be in the big leagues. If they're in the big leagues for a day, or if they're in the big leagues for 15 years, but you're competing with the best of the best in the baseball world that we're in, and it's just what are you gonna do to not necessarily separate yourself, because everybody's good. If they weren't good, they wouldn't be good. So what are you gonna do to make your game flawless? And the ins and outs of the game, you had to find your ways, and you've seen every aspect of the game with different routines and the way the way that everybody went about the game from being in different organizations, it was elite. I personally think I feel like just taking certain things from certain people, seeing something new every day, and that was the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of transitioning into another question here. What we like to focus on the Beyond Baseball podcast is just the human beings behind the numbers and the performances on the field. You've talked a lot about kind of your journey through baseball, how you got you where you were, but what are some of the passions that you have away from the game? What kind of things that make you and drive you every single day outside of baseball?
Number one, the Lord. I stand on the Lord. Family. I'm big with family. That's like my family, my backbone. My family gets me through every obstacle that I go through. Hate to say it, video games. Video games is a big one. Eating. I love trying food. Just in listening to music and being around my boys. That's it doesn't even matter if it's in baseball or if it's away from the game. I just love being around my boys, and if it's me being around my boys chopping the mess or playing video games or shooting pool, whatever it is, I love being with my boys and spending time with my boys.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because you can kind of tell that you really have that foundation around you, right? So like, no matter what happens on or off the field, you got your faith, you got your family, you got your friends, all these things that you can kind of go back to kind of get away from whether it was a good or a bad performance, kind of really separate yourself.
100%.
Yeah. What would you say is your favorite video game and also favorite type of food?
Favorite type of food?
Ton of options.
if I'm cooking it, favorite type of food is chicken. Chicken, rice, can't go wrong with it.
Yeah.
And then favorite video game would be Call of Duty, and I'd have to say the old Warzone. I don't like the Warzone.
That one was the best one.
Yeah, I'm not big on this new. Not big on it, but it would have to 100% be Call of Duty.
The new feature's not great in the new one?
Nah.
Hard pass.
It ain't it.
Yeah.
It is not it.
That's awesome. So now, you have some of those passions away from the game. You've had this awesome experience, too, in the Arizona Fall League and kind of developing yourself there. As you kind of get into the 2023 season and we start preparing for spring training, what's some of your goals going into this year?
Just be the best version of myself every day. That's my main goal. I'm not real big on number goals, just on the fact that if you're trying to chase number goals, you're selling yourself short. You're putting too much stress on yourself, and the number side of it isn't what I want to look at. But I just try to be the best version of myself every day and bring something of my game to the field every single day. If it's not going to be, because you're not going to hit every day like that. That's just, you're not going to play great defense every day. But I'm going to do something great every day to put my team in a situation to win.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great mindset too, because you don't hear that from a lot of players, right? You hear like, "Oh, I'm going to go get X, Y, Z number, hit this many home runs," but the fact that you're kind of focused on you and the person that you can be on and off the field, I mean, that's beautiful, and that's like one of the things that we really love touching on in this podcast.
Any way I could bring joy to the game and just have fun, and any way I can put my team in a situation to win. I can't complain after that. Whatever happens after that happens. If I look up and I'm hitting 220 and we just won a World Series, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Like I've done everything I can to put myself and help my team win, and we're winning. You know what I'm saying? So like I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh well, I want to hit 300. Yeah, it's gonna be nice to hit 300. It'd be dope to hit 300, but let's be realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, we interviewed Will Klein, one of your teammates of the Royals, and he talked about, he's like, just go out there and be the teammate everybody wants to play for. He's like, that's all that matters at the end of the day. He's like, what do you do on and off the field? Like, you're going to try your best to perform. You're like the elite and the top. It's like, but what thing you can control every day is just go out there and be a good teammate.
Right.
Yeah.
Play hard. That's all. Like, certain things you control. Be a good person. play hard, and do the things right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Control what you can control. There's other things that you can't control. I can't control where the ball goes after it leaves my bat.
Yeah.
Can't control where this pitch goes after it leaves my hand. Like, control what you can control, and whatever else you can't control, let it be.
Yep. Yeah, and you get all those external factors and outside noise that try to like tell you what you need to do and all those kind of things. Sometimes you just got to be where your feet are and just kind of play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that kind of ties into the last question that I always ask, I guess, because we want this podcast, one, to be something that the fans really enjoy and get that human side, but we also want to have a kind of a resource for future athletes and guys who are trying to make it. So do you have like that one piece of advice for the next generation of baseball players that are trying to kind of find their identity outside of the game or try to figure out how to make their way in professional baseball? What would that one piece of advice be?
Chase your dream and never let anybody tell you that you can't do it. I'm 5'8", 5'9", 160 pounds. When I signed, I was 5'7", 5'8", 5'7", around there, 140 pounds. And I've gotten to where I've gotten to. And me personally, a lot of people told me coming up I would never get to the point I'm at.
Yeah.
And I just put my head down and said, no, you're wrong, and I'm gonna prove you wrong. So to all the youngins that are coming up in anything in life, it doesn't even have to be baseball. Just whatever it is, whatever your dream is, whatever your goal is, chase your dream and chase it to the fullest. Don't cut corners with it. Chase it and don't give up on it until your dream is achieved.
Yeah, I love that. It goes back to like, if you don't believe in yourself, why would anyone else believe in when you go in there? So you got to believe in yourself first in order to get there. And I think that's just an awesome thing to wrap up on. Samad, we can't thank you enough for joining us on Beyond Baseball. We're wishing you nothing but the best in 2023, and we'll be watching.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys for having me.